suppose See Emily Play, it's the best sort of encapsulation of what the Floyd were about at that time, because they had it's a pop song, but at the same time it's a bit of a soundscape.
Much more of the sort of psychedelic vibe that perhaps had been lacking from the first single, Arnold Lane, and dipping even more deeply into this English whimsy, which was very, very strong and very influential at the time.
See Emily Play became a huge chart success. The hype that the record created led to eager anticipation about the group's first LP. However, the album's title was to become somewhat of an issue.
The original working title for the album, that's the job file, was Projection. There's a few adverts for Arnold Lane, which if you look in the magazines and so forth from the time, they talk about the next projected sound for '67. So they were obviously, the record company was sort of thinking along those lines for publicity. But fairly late in the day, it was Peter Bound said to me, Syd just sort of came up one day and said, I think we want to use this title, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which he'd got from it's the odd chapter out in Wind in the Willows. When you read The Wind in the Willows, there's this strange chapter which doesn't follow the narrative flow.
So I was thinking, murmured the rat, dreamful and languid, dance music, the lilting sort that runs on without a stop, but with words in it too. It passes into words and out of them again. I catch them at intervals. Then it is dance music once more, and then nothing but the reeds, soft, thin, whispering. You hear better than I, said the mole sadly. I cannot catch the words. The title very much reflects the importance of that innocent, childlike vibe that Flower Power had. We're talking the summer of 1967 here. It was the Flower Power summer.
Piper at the Gates of Dawn was released in August 1967, the height of the Summer of Love. The record is one of Britain's few psychedelic masterpieces and still has a resonance almost 40 years later.
I still find Piper at the Gates of Dawn to be a very impressive creation. And we're talking about a record that was made nearly 40 years ago. It still stands. No question about that at all.
For me, Piper at the Gates of Dawn remains the finest work Pink Floyd ever put together. It's a remarkable album. Now, I'm not knocking what they did post Syd Barrett with Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, The Wall. These were wonderful, magnificent pieces of work. But what made Piper at the Gates of Dawn stand apart from so much at the time was that it was eccentric, it was significant, it was eloquent, and all these were combined through Syd Barrett, who was a conduit for so much that was going on, so much that was dark, so much that was almost unnerving and a little bit difficult to comprehend. The prime example to me is a song called The Bike on there, which seems a little bit fairy tale, a little bit happy-go-lucky, a little bit Watch Your Mother, if you will. But if you get deep into the roots, and what you're actually hearing and listening to is a man opening up his psychosis, opening up his psychology, opening up his disturbed yet quite brilliant mind.
I've got a bike, you can ride it if you like. It's got a basket, a bell and rings and things to make it look good. I'd give it to you if I could, but I borrowed it. You're the kind of...
I've got a bike, you can ride it if you like. It's got a bell that rings and things to make it look good. But again, almost like a nursery rhyme. So we cannot underestimate the importance of this sort of fairy, childlike world that at that time hallucinogenic drugs were associated with.
You get points where it seems to be slowing down at the end of each verse, or the lyrics and the structure of it break up in unexpected ways. So you can't really predict which way Syd is going to sing next. But it's got that kind of oblique, sort of unpredictable air about the whole piece, which makes it all the more intriguing, all the more fascinating.
For me to listen to it, it's almost a bit uncomfortable, really. You've got that mad sound collage when he goes off into the room of musical tunes, which is very strange. And I remember the first time I heard it, I remember thinking, woo, what's happening here? You've got all these groovy, almost pop songs and the psychedelic stuff, and then it closes the album with this. In a way, it's you've got a simple song, but it's with an oddly nursery rhyme type subject, but in a way it can be it's unsettling.
Another song on the album, Interstellar Overdrive, had long been a firm live favourite of the band's and was one of the songs that had earned them their psychedelic reputation.
Came up with a kind of soundscape, really. It was painting with music.
Interstellar Overdrive really came out of that, that need to create these sort of improvisational, experimental pieces in that live environment. In fact, Pete Jenner tells the story that Interstellar Overdrive first took shape when he was humming to Syd the tune of, I think it was My Little Red Book by Arthur Lee and Love, and Syd picked up the guitar and started copying the sort of descending riff.
Syd's behaviour was becoming increasingly erratic, and after a disastrous American tour, it was clear that something had to change. However, Syd's condition has in recent years been the focus of some debate.
It's very easy to say that Syd Barrett was an acid casualty. But on the other hand, a lot of other people took LSD without having sort of psychotic breakdowns or whatever. So, I mean, it's become pretty clear over the years that there was already a schizophrenic condition there, and clearly these drugs will accentuate that. On the other hand, I mean, there's no doubt he was taking absolutely colossal quantities of LSD.
The interesting thing about Syd Barrett is the sheer amount of things that you read about him that contradict each other. I mean, he's gone down in history as this bloke who was sort of fried on acid the whole time. But more recently, these interviews have come out with people who he lived with who think that probably you could count on two hands the number of times he took acid during 1967. I mean, obviously Syd had his problems, but I don't think it was down to that. I mean, he smoked copious amounts of weed, and I don't think the effect of that could be underestimated. You know, he became very paranoid and very much in his own little bubble, and you know, you could perhaps partly attribute it to that. He also took a lot of mandrax, which very, very sort of powerful, I suppose you could say it was a sedative. What that actually was that happened to him, I think it's very hard to say. I mean, I think that's why people find him so fascinating.
Despite Syd's deteriorating condition, the group did manage to release a third single, the Barrett-composed Apples and Oranges.
Flip-top, smoking cigarettes in the pocket, feeling good at the top, shopping at shops, walking in the sunshine town, feeling very cool. With the butchers and the bakers and the supermarket stores, getting everything she wants from the supermarket store.
Sort out the follow-up hit and failing. You know, again, I think it's an example of the kind of pressures that Syd was under at the time.
It was recorded around about November 67, which was getting towards the end of Syd's time with the group anyway. And so, you know, they were scratching it. They needed a single to come out. There were all sorts of financial pressures on the band, and you know, Syd was feeling the pressure, perhaps not coming up with the songwriting in the way he did before. But you know, they put this one together.
By the tail end of 1967, Syd's increasingly erratic behaviour became too much of a burden for the rest of the group to bear. Syd's status within Pink Floyd began to drastically alter.
I mean, there were these stories of him standing on stage all night and playing one note with his back to the audience. I mean, you can see how it became hugely infuriating for the rest of the group. And they decided that they couldn't go on like this. And there had been a series of gigs where he hadn't turned up at all, and Davy O'List from The Nice had depped on guitar. Something had to give. And there were various plans. I mean, the Floyd's management had one notion, which was that Syd could become a kind of Brian Wilson figure. That is, not go on the road with them, not appear on stage with them, and, you know, frankly, fuck the gig up every single night. But hopefully could still provide the material, write the songs, in the way that Brian Wilson was at that stage doing with the Beach Boys.
The band wanted to keep him on board, and they went through this period where, I mean, when David Gilmour joined, you know, around about December '67, and, you know, the announcement in the press where he was to, you know, help broaden their sound or take it in new directions, though what they really needed at the time was somebody who could play guitar reliably and do singing and stuff like that. And Syd was still going to be the songwriter. This seems to be what they were saying. So they ended up with this strange period for half a dozen gigs at the beginning in 1968 where you have both David Gilmour and Syd Barrett in the band. They did try it with Syd and David Gilmour together. But again, that didn't work out. And there's the famous story where they just decided for one gig where they weren't going to bother to pick him up. And that was it. They went on to do all the various Pink Floyd things they did. But, you know, the upshot of it all was, yeah, after January '68, Syd was on his own.
After the split, Barrett initially retired from the public eye. However, there was to be a peculiar and haunting epitaph to Syd's departure. On Pink Floyd's second LP, Saucerful of Secrets, released after Syd had left the group, the band decided to include the Barrett-composed Jug Band Blues.
And I'm most obliged to you for making it clear that I'm not here. And I never knew the moon could be so big, and I never knew the moon could be so blue. And I'm grateful that you threw away my old shoe.
I don't think he was just making it as he went along. You know, I mean, there's a version of it in circulation from the BBC session from a few months later, and it sounds exactly the same. It's the exact same structure and the exact same lyrics, you know. So I don't think it was a random outpouring.
It's a haunting song, really, Jug Band Blues, because that awareness of what's happening to him is quite scary in a way. I mean, it must have been a very hard burden to bear. You know, it's almost better if you're cracking up, you're breaking up like that. It's almost better to know that it's not going on than to be so acutely aware that you're falling apart. And yet, having these flashes of lucidity in which you can actually describe the process of falling apart.